Welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie DeYoung Skelling, the podcast co host here, and I'm a parenting educator. Today, we're diving into a crucial topic: how learning STEM in school, after school, and at home can profoundly impact your child's success and interest in these vital fields. We are happy to feature another Iowa State University assistant professor. Sara Nelson is joining us today. Sara serves as the director of the NASA Iowa Space Grant Consortium and works to support STEM education and research. Welcome, Sara.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I've had a lot of fun not only preparing for the podcast with you, but also thinking about my STEM journey too. And so I actually grew up in Minnesota and got to do a lot of fun things outdoors, a lot on the lakes, of course. But then later on, I became a teacher down here in Iowa, worked at the Science Center of Iowa. And a fun fact, I got to hold the snakes, salamanders, and turtles. And also, yeah, I thought that was actually I was actually pretty, hesitant at first, but then, found that I was able to do it, so it was a good learning experience for me too, and after that, again, taught, and I'm now here at Iowa State and have loved every minute of it.
We are so excited both to have you at Iowa State to get that wealth of knowledge that you have, but we're even more excited to have your parenting knowledge and your STEM knowledge with us today on the podcast. So let's dive in. As usual, our listeners know we usually start with the definition, so we'll go with that. Um, we're going to talk about not only STEM, but another term called integrated STEM. So, what does that mean? The National Science Teaching Association defines integrated STEM as an instructional approach that blends concepts and practices from multiple science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines within a single learning experience. Whew. All right, so let's think about that a moment, right? That's a really technical definition, but what does that look like? So instead of teaching each subject separately, teaching science lesson, a math lesson, talking about technology, student engaged in learning in this method, right, naturally weaves together these all in different fields. So what does that look like in practice, Sara?
That's a really good question, and to me, integrated STEM, again, really means blending science, technology, engineering, and math into one single learning experience. And so you really can't have the experience with all of those 4 components, being there at the same time. And so that means we can't teach each subject separately. But in essence, so it's really about helping kids see how these are all connected and also how STEM connects to their lives too.
Absolutely. So do you have a way that is best to do this?
There's one way that I would recommend, and one of them is project based learning. And the title, kind of says it all. But really, what we're looking for is a project that would embed the science, technology, engineering, and math. And often it's tied to something in the kids' lives. So, for example, maybe you see a bridge, and you want to build a model of that bridge, learn more about it, maybe test to see how much weight it can hold.
Yeah.
Really, right there, think about all the things that they're using. They're using science to understand the forces, math to calculate load, engineering to build all at once. And so hopefully that's a fun example for you there.
Absolutely, and I think you might have mentioned that there's a bridge in your life. There is a bridge engineer in your life?
Yes, a little shout out to my husband. He is the state bridge engineer for the state of Iowa. And so it's been fun to sit at the dinner table learning more about bridges and concrete.
Absolutely. I bet he would be a great person to go to say, "Hey, we're doing a bridge camp. Let's do this."
Hmm.
That all sounds way more fun and more meaningful than just doing, like, a worksheet on bridges, right?
Yes, exactly. I often like to share with people when I'm talking with them that STEM is a verb, not a noun, meaning it's supposed to be active, and engaging. And so when we think about STEM integration, it's, not just about adding a tech tool or a math problem to a science lesson. It's about intentional design, it's about actions, it's about being a verb, and creating experiences where STEM disciplines really naturally intersect. And it's really not hard work, to put them all together. And when we do it right, man, that's when kids really start thinking like problem solvers and really, I mean, you will be just blown away by what they're able to do.
I love that so, so much. And it doesn't just help them, like, in that moment, right? How does it help them in the long run?
In the long run, I think it lays a really strong educational foundation and it builds skills that they're going to need for the rest of their lives. So, it builds these real world skills. If you can learn how to ask a question, test your idea, solve challenges together as a team, you can do just about anything.
Yeah.
So STEM is really about being, hands on, relevant to your life, and really showcasing how all of these things in our lives are connected.
As you say that, I'm thinking about, "Oh, I do that." Like, we do that in work. We did that as we prepared for this podcast, right? So,
Hmm.
it really builds those skills to be ready for the real world, absolutely. Uh, so for parents, we can know that the takeaway is to look for learning that's connected, creative, concept driven, as we're looking
Yes.
at things that are STEM integrated.
Yeah, absolutely. So whether you're at home or at school, if you can help kids explore big ideas through these integrated STEM projects or activities, they're not just learning, they're also thinking like
Mhm.
scientists and engineers, and they're being scientists and engineers. And that's a really exciting time.
Absolutely, and that's what makes it so effective, right?
Yeah, project based learning is really about solving real world problems.
Mhm.
And if, just think about that. If we have young people that are able to solve real world problems with us, that's absolutely amazing. So, even things like, designing a roller coaster or a wildlife platform, all of these things really help build skills and things that'll help them the rest of their lives.
Mhm.
And there was a study, out of Kent State that showed even with future elementary teachers, that if we use project based learning, they can be very successful at integrating multiple STEM disciplines. And it showcases to them, I think, how powerful integrating science, technology, engineering, and math can be, not only in the classroom, but even outside of the classroom, too.
Absolutely. So setting those future educators up for success as well as they are entering the education field. I love that. So it sounds more engaging than just a regular worksheet. Sets those educators up for success. What challenges might you see in the classroom?
Yeah, great question. Because sometimes, even experienced teachers may face some of these challenges or these points of tension. We could call them that.
Sure.
But one of them is thinking about content versus skills. And so teachers or educators really must balance thinking about, okay, I'm teaching these facts, but then embedding it with these problem solving skills too. And so, again, I think a combination of the two is the perfect way to go.
Yeah.
Using real world issues like environmental challenges or other to help blend both of them together.
And it connects to the really connects to their real life, right? How that content applies to who I am or what's around me. Absolutely.
I think a second point is, guided instruction versus play. Now, I'm going to tell you, right here and right now, I think STEM play is amazing and one of the best things you can do with your children. And I think as educators, it's important for us to offer those opportunities for STEM play too. But sometimes a structured lesson is the way to go also. So, it's that tension between guided instruction and play, but always letting youth lead the learning, whenever
Mhm.
possible, giving them time to explore, to experiment, to ask questions that, you know, is STEM play.
Absolutely.
That's that inquiry process. And so it's a great way to fuel creativity and curiosity within our children.
Absolutely. And, um, as someone that works with an environmental rating sorts of things, that how do you set up that environment to guide the play? Maybe it's not just sitting down and teaching them something, here's
Mhm.
the facts, but how can you set up that environment for them to ask those questions, and that sort of thing? So, um, kind of a nerdy thing is that we love to talk about how play is learning, play is work for children.
Mhm.
And that applies to this, right? What can we do to set up the environment to lead them in play so they can learn? Um, yeah, and that leads us into the idea of looking at processes versus product, right? What does that
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah, and I think it ties to that question, that you were posing earlier there. And so if, as a parent or an educator, you focus on the process,
Mhm.
maybe a little bit more than the product, I think you're going to find the learning experience really changes. And so success isn't then just about what's the final result or the final answer, but it's about what you did along the way. What
Absolutely.
are the skills you had to use? These integrated skills. Did you get to do some trial and error? If you had an issue that came up, how did you solve it?
Yeah.
So, again, it's valuing that process, along the way, not only the end product. The end product is important too, but
Mhm.
I think if we can all focus on the process a little bit more, I think we might be surprised, at how that impacts learning.
Absolutely, and that process involves things like looking at, how we're collaborating versus focusing on individual needs. Where are we balancing those? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, in all of these STEM things, you're often working with a team.
Mhm.
And that ability to build your teamwork skills is something that will pay off at any point in your life, I
Right.
believe. And so this group work kind of builds that teamwork and it supports each child's, unique strengths because everybody can bring something, to the group. So strategies, like individual brainstorming before group sharing, can also help. you know, Different teamwork techniques, they all play into it. And, I think I shared this earlier on, but, sometimes at NASA, we're asked to do things that no one has done before. But in order to do them, we have to work as a team and we need everybody at the table and we need every thought and we need people asking questions and saying, hey, I'm not sure that's going to work, that kind of thing. And so, again, collaboration versus individual needs here.
Mhm.
Teamwork can't beat that skill anytime we can build it. I think we need to do it.
Absolutely. And you're still utilizing individual skills, right? But working
Mhm.
on how do we play together and making it all happen. And I gotta say, I got a little bit of goosebumps when you started talking about NASA like that. Like, that's real, right? We're talking about how this plays directly from being a kid to things like being, belonging
Mm.
to NASA and um, that real world. So that did give me a little bit of goosebumps. So that leads us kind of into we looked at the challenges. Excuse me. We looked at the challenges. Um, we might see what maybe works better or what works. I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but how it all plays together and what kind of
Mhm.
challenges we might see in the classroom. But what sorts of things can parents maybe expect if they're sending their child to a classroom that is focused on integrated STEM? What can kids and parents expect to see in those classrooms?
I think a lot of excitement, number one, but I love STEM.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's a shift from memorizing things to instead figuring out things. And so memorizing facts, like the stages of a butterfly's life cycle, might really help, on an end quiz or an end assessment. But real understanding comes from seeing the big ideas about butterflies and their life cycles. And
Absolutely.
so, once you've maybe seen it in action, maybe you went to the butterfly garden, you worked with a scientist or, different things. Once you understand that process, you can apply that process to other things, then too. So, if we can get kids to grasp those big ideas, then they can apply them in new situations. And to me, that's what STEM is really about.
Absolutely. I love that. And it leads us into, things like those there's 3 dimensions that now you'll have to tell us what this stands for because 'cause I'm not thinking of it, but the NGSS looks at 3 dimensions. So,
Mhm.
they're looking at kinda just like you said, those core ideas, those big
Mhm.
concepts. Okay, first of all, rewind. What is NGSS?
That's always a good question. Yeah, next generation science standards, and those
Okay, okay.
are national standards, and Iowa's standards are based off of the NGSS standards. Yep.
So those standards, that first thing off of the bat is that looking at those big concepts, like you said.
Yeah.
Um, and then it leads right I mean, I'm just looking at them, and it leads right into kind of those things you just talked about, right? Sciences
Mhm.
practices, actually
Yep.
looking at what scientists do, right? and then cross-cutting concepts. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so what the NGSS, would like to see is for, again, the students to be doing or the youth to be doing the science or the STEM.
Uh-huh.
And again, you mentioned those 3 things. So I'm gonna start with the core ideas there in
Yeah.
that whatever the teacher or educator is teaching about, they should have in the back of their mind, okay, this is the end goal. This is the big idea that I would like my students to take away from this. So you kind of start with this core idea, and then you think about, okay, in order to learn about this core idea, what are the things or the practices that I need to do, like a
Okay.
scientist does,
Yep.
to help me learn it? And so, like, for example, we've talked about these things, but it's looking at things, asking questions, measuring things with tools, all those kinds of things. Those are the practices. And so then the cross cutting concepts are embedded in these topics also, in that
Okay.
universally there are patterns or systems that apply not only to the big idea that maybe you were looking at, but also apply to another big idea. So the name kind of helps, like, it's a concept that cuts across things, different
Sure.
disciplines. Yeah.
Makes
But you know what? To be honest, it took me a while to figure all this out. So I want everyone to know that, like, again, not only for teaching science, like, you don't have to have all the answers, right now up front. You can
Mhm.
just work with your kids, to ask and answer questions together. So, don't worry if some of the things I shared are new to you.
Yeah.
You can always call me up and I'll be happy to chat about them.
Absolutely. And that's why I didn't do a solo podcast on this because I don't really know it. I don't really know about all of this. I just like to use, bring in friends that know a lot more than I do. So that's awesome. Thank you for kind of walking us through what that looks like. Um, so I'm thinking about what about like activities? We set up activities for things. They might seem fun, but sometimes can feel maybe disconnected.
Hmm. Yeah, we call it the activity trap. Like, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. But then we didn't think about anything maybe that we did. And I have fallen into that trap myself. I'm going to be
Sure.
really honest, here, because it's fun. It's fun to do all of these STEM things. But it's also important that we think about what we've done and reflect on what we've done and try to kind of take it, I guess you could say, to the next level. And that, I think, is what the NGSS standards we're hoping to kind of avoid,
Mhm.
too, that we would look in depth at certain topics and really dig into them a little bit more. And so, again, it's about keeping that big goal in mind when you're teaching. What is it that I really want people to walk away from this unit or this lesson plan with?
Absolutely. So, before we wrap up, kind of looking at the STEM in the classroom, are there any ways that you might recommend to make those big ideas stick?
Yeah, we have 5 great ones here. The first one is just I would start or make sure that you use kid friendly language. We want to build vocabulary, of course, with the people that we're
Absolutely.
working with, but make sure it's also, understandable.
Mhm.
I think using a variety of examples, maybe, and touching on a concept more than once is great.
Yeah.
And so you want to revisit it, over time.
Mhm.
I think encouraging youth to lead the learning and then to also have rich discussions is another key, and to share their thinking, with other people.
Yeah.
And then, of course, assessing for application and not just recall. And so asking them to apply it in some new way.
Yeah, absolutely. How might this come up in your life otherwise? If you see the same situation come up when you're on the farm, what might you do? Ways
Mhm.
that it's not just, well, I can recite it for you. I love all those ideas. Um, One of the notes I have is that when you learn ways to solve problems, explain new situations, that's really deep learning. It's not that surface level learning, and I love that. So do you have any final takeaways for parents as we're not done with this episode yet, but we're moving to some other areas. We're gonna move outside the classroom. Do you have any takeaways for parents, on what the big idea here is when we're looking at the classroom setting?
I think if there's something I could maybe suggest to parents, it would be to ask their children, why do you think that? or something along those lines, like to ask them to explain their thinking because we've
Mhm.
shifted then from activity mania to reflection and thinking. And so you get to ask the question why finally, right?
Why?
You
Why?
can ask that question.
Why?
Yep. I love it. Oh, that's great.
Oh, I love that. So we can look at what is really happening in that classroom, what to look for, those sorts of things. But, you know, we know parents want their children to have the best education possible, and we hope that the subjects in school set them up for success after school too. So, we know that now more than ever, there are opportunities for youth and young people to learn STEM in a wide array of settings, Sarah. Um, what does that look like? Can you help us think through that concept of beyond the school?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think they're a really important piece of the STEM puzzle and can be really impactful for students. And so, many of us do think that a lot of STEM learning happens primarily in classrooms, and
Mhm.
a lot of fabulous learning does happen in our classrooms.
Absolutely.
But, some of the most impactful learning can also happen outside, those classrooms with a lot of great partners here around the state. So that might include places like clubs, summer programs, museums, parks, and even online activities. But to me, the really exciting part, about that is that there's growing evidence that these out of school opportunities really do directly affect what's possible inside classrooms and
Mhm.
vice versa. And so it becomes this two-way learning street or this great partnership between school and out of school time.
Absolutely. So, there are a wide range, kinda throwing this in here, there's a wide range of opportunities, um, and I'm plugging it because we haven't done so yet, but you actually work with the 4-H program,
Mhm.
but people might think 4-H is just the club or it's just showing animals, but it has such a wide range of things too. So there are camps often, there's after school programs, it kinda depends on your area, but, that's kinda just the starting point, but there are so many
Mhm.
different opportunities even with under the 4-H umbrella, and the youth under umbrella within extension and outreach, but we don't wanna just limit to that. That was just kind of a little
Mhm.
plug there to kind of where we're starting from. Um, that moves us into the National Research Council reports that indicate the report indicates that effective out of school programs can make significant contributions to our kids' development.
Mhm.
So, would you go through some of those data points with us?
Yeah, sure. So these programs can really boost young people's interest in and understanding of STEM. And again, they can be really great partners to what's ever being taught, in school. And again, these programs in the out of school time setting are really not about memorizing facts. They're more about gaining experiences.
Mhm.
And experiences, I think, are just really great at not only helping you understand STEM, but I think they, in fact, impact literacy and math and other things, well
Yes,
too.
absolutely.
So we have that kind of boost in interest, but then it also gives people a chance to connect young people to caring adults who can serve as role models. And a role model can be very impactful
Yeah.
in a student's life. Even if you think about your own life, I'm sure there are a couple people that really stand out that really impacted your educational journey.
Yeah.
And so these out of school time settings are a great place to find some role models too. Just imagine your child, meeting an engineer, a scientist, or a tech innovator who inspires them, and you
Yes.
never know, maybe works with them, later on down the
Love
road
that.
too.
Yes, that eventually they might be your colleague.
Yeah.
You can be their mentor. I love that. I'm just thinking yeah, I'm thinking about, like, the people in my life that I had, but I'm also hoping that, like, I can be that to some kids too,
Mhm.
throughout our community, so I love that one. Um, will you talk about reducing the achievement gap as well?
Yeah. And so, if you think about it, getting extra time in STEM or whatever topic it might be helps you advance your learning, really. And so it can help you, advance your learning, gain new skills and all of that. And so as a whole, these programs I think can help reduce any achievement gaps, that might exist for a
Absolutely.
variety of reasons. Because again, the more experiences that we know are high quality, we can provide our students, the better it'll be for their learning overall.
So as you're talking about, the quality, what are the sorts of things that parents could be looking for in an out of school STEM program for their child? So they're looking for a program to get their child into, right?
Mhm.
What sorts of things should they look for that will tell them that, that program might be a good fit or might be effective?
Yeah. Well, there's kind of 3 themes here that, the report shared, and that was that programs that engage, connect, and respond, to
Mhm.
youth are typically, the
Yeah,
best ones or the ones you wanna see if you can find.
sure.
And so for engagement, if you think about it, if you actively involve children intellectually, maybe socially and emotionally through hands-on experiences, sustained STEM practices, and a supportive learning community, man, I'd wanna send my kid there.
Right.
And so, anytime you have high engagement, I think that's a good program to be looking at. The second thing would be that respond or responsiveness.
Mhm.
Does the program allow for young people to be thinking? Does it respond to their interests? Does it promote collaboration and leadership? Does it treat staff as co-learners alongside youth? I think if you could see that, again, that's another great, representation or another great thing to look for in a program.
Mhm.
And then that last word, connect. Strong programs, really do link STEM learning across school, home, and community settings. They use local resources and they really help guide families towards future STEM opportunities. And so, think about that. Maybe look at their websites and different things. Talk to parents that have maybe sent their children, to these programs too. But as a rule, if it is an engaging program, if it's responsive and it's connecting, youth in different ways, I think you've probably got a good program there.
That's awesome. So what you said kind of leads us into our next section is we've talked about the school. We've talked about out of school activities, after school, weekends, those sorts of things, summer programs. Let's talk about STEM at home. What can parents do to integrate STEM within their home?
Mm. That's a really good question. And I don't want people to think they have to do a full lesson plan here to have great STEM at home. You can literally just talk about some of the things that are going on, around you. Think
Mhm.
about in the things that you're doing, where's the science, technology, engineering, math? But here's a couple other ideas too. So one is, to think about authentic tasks. What is something that you maybe need to have, completed at home? Is there a challenge, something that might matter in the community that your child, could look
Mhm.
at too? Again, I think it's all about looking around you and saying, okay, I could use my STEM skills to maybe solve this challenge, or address this, issue or that type of thing. And so creating authentic tasks.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, I think this is one of my favorite ones is using the engineering design process. We've all innovative and made something without maybe all of us thinking about it. Like, maybe you dropped something down a deep hole and you had to make something that you could lower down into the hole to grab the thing and pick it up. That's all the engineering design process. And so,
Right.
again, guiding them through planning, building, testing, and then improving, is a great way to do that. So, say you build even a tower, at home out of
Mhm.
blocks, those kinds of things, but it can only go so high. Okay, let's talk about it. Like, how can I build this tower taller? What can I do? Let's improve it and let's use that engineering design process again. And if it fails, that's okay. That's part of the process too. Let's just try again. And so, using the engineering design process.
And as you talk about the engineering design process, you said it, we do that. It's a cycle. And we often see as adults, we see the process where it doesn't stop, right? Goes in a circle. So
Hmm.
using that and applying it to their situation really continues to build real life skills, which leads us into the next point is to connect the dots. So how can we help kids see that it relates to what they're building? How do we help them connect to their future self and what is happening now versus and also connecting things like how science and math relate, right?
Yeah. Connecting the dots typically can just happen through discussion,
Yeah.
too. And so, really helping kids see how science and math relate to what they're doing or building.
Mhm.
Again, I know literacy is such a, critical piece and something that you've talked about,
Yeah.
in your podcast, but having those science discussions and using as much science language as you can is also really helpful so they can make connections not only from what's maybe going on at home, but then when they get into the
Mhm.
classroom, maybe some of that same language is used and it helps, in that situation too. And so often it's just discussion for connecting the dots,
And
that kind of thing.
we talk about literacy. So last season, we had a whole season on literacy, and it's integrated learning just in general, right? So as
Mhm.
we build vocabulary around science and technology and engineering and math and ag and all of the things around us, right? As we start to learn about those things and be in those environments and see bridges and see roads and have the language, guess what? That also builds literacy. So it plays back and forth. So absolutely, I love the little kind of I shouldn't say integration because we use that word, but you're integrating the different aspects as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think another thing is to structure, teamwork to focus on helping with the teamwork part. So,
Mhm,
yes, I have two brothers. We didn't always get along. And so sometimes it didn't quite work out. But, like if you're working with siblings or friends, can we assign roles or just encourage everybody,
mhm.
to contribute ideas? And then we've talked about this before, but assessing the process and not, just the product. And so,
Yes.
focusing on helping people, celebrate effort, and their creativity and their problem solving, I think is a really important thing. I think actually knowing that it's okay to fail
Oh,
and that that's actually part of the process,
mhm.
is really important, and there are thousands, if not millions of examples of that kind of out, in the world of somebody trying to invent something and it did not work the first time.
There you go again, making me get goosebumps, right? It's okay to have things fail because that's how you learn, right? That's how you learn and grow and figure out, well, what actually will work better. Um, so it's appreciating that process, assessing that process. Absolutely. It's not so we're looking at integrated STEM and it's not just about doing science. Science guy. Um, I just
Ye
think of the Bill Nye song, but Bill Nye was pretty good about integrating some science things. But anyway, integrated science is more than just the word science, right? It's not just a noun, like you said, it's a verb. It's helping kids to think, create,
Mhm.
solve those problems in real life.
Exactly, the more we can support kids, in not only getting STEM opportunities, but applying and thinking about the processes of STEM, I think, the
Mhm.
better. And then if you think about it, we're really helping prepare them for potential future complex challenges, that they may face. And honestly, that's just a great life skill to have as you go through your life. The ability to ask and answer questions and problem solve around it is, I think, one of the key skills that we can develop.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up this conversation, I have one kind of last question for you. Everything we've talked about is kind of a lot. Um, do parents have to know everything about integrated STEM, about how to use it in the home, what we need to do, or what would be your last note to parents who are listening to us today?
I think to just kind of move alongside with your child in the asking and answering of questions, because you can find the answers together.
Mhm.
And in that process, you have a ton of fun, if I'm being honest, here,
Yeah.
usually. And you also build some really great memories, together. So not only are you learning STEM and all of that, but you're having this time together where you're asking and answering questions, but yet you're also trying to let your child lead, the learning and lead that asking and answering of questions. But you don't need to know everything. Absolutely not. Like, there is no way to know everything. Like, the elementary teachers I work with, I say that, like, you literally can't know all of these science disciplines. And so
Right?
think about instead, okay, how can I instead help my students ask and answer questions, or how can I help my child ask and answer questions? And I think also, I really want to stress just even asking them to share their thinking. Like, why do you think that?
Yeah.
Changes the nature of the conversation too, and it really deepens it. And so I just hope you all have fun, with your STEM that you're going to be doing together.
Just have fun, do it together, and explore and learn. And honestly, I learn the most when I dive into those conversations, like with my niece and nephews. They ask a question, I don't know, let's figure it out. Let's problem solve. So I love that. You don't have to know it all, and our parents should know by now. We aren't looking for perfect parents. We're looking for, you know, willing to learn, willing to jump in, and again, have some fun. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Um, so in closing, I kind of just said it, but there are ways for STEM to be integrated in school, in out of school programs, at home. And it's just being intentional about bringing in questions, bringing in ideas and exploration into everyday life. And it's important to remember that STEM is important for long term life skill building. So, any last minute notes before we wrap here, Sarah?
Uh, the only thing I might want to share here is that STEM is really for everyone.
Mhm.
And I think we need to encourage everyone to at least consider it, you know? And so, okay, I know I'm a STEM person, but um, even I just really want to stress that STEM is really for everyone. And so please, make sure to encourage your children, to explore these different topics and maybe even explore some of the careers, later on in life. And look for partners, on this STEM journey, whether it's, Iowa 4-H, the space grant, all these other great partners we have around on the state. We really want to be there to help you, on that STEM journey. So please ask, and we will do our best to help you out.
Absolutely. And as you say that, is there any way to find those resources?
So there are a couple ways. One way, of course, is to go to some of the websites, for these different groups. Iowa 4-H has a great website. The Space Grant has a website up. The Governor's STEM Advisory Council also has some great resources for parents, and other things too. So you could go to some of those things. But also, I think your school or some of the STEM museums and things, in your neighborhood are great resources. And then, in addition, it could be your neighbor, somebody does STEM for their career. They can be a great resource, also as you think about where you might want to help your child.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining. We've talked all things STEM integration today, and it's been a lot of fun. I've had fun integrating into this conversation. But thank you for joining us on the Science of Parenting podcast. Listeners, before you go, remember to check out your local resources. Check out those resources available to you. Sometimes I plug our own resources, but today I'm going to plug Iowa 4-H and all those other amazing resources that Sarah mentioned. So, with that, Sarah, will you bring us out today?
Happily, thank you. So come along as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is a research based education program hosted by Mackenzie DeYoung Schelling, produced and edited by Brock Bierman, with contributions from Barbara Dunn Swanson, Dr. Connie Beecher, Haley Walker, and Morgan Noel. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook. This program is brought to you by Iowa State University Extension and Outreach.